I'm gonna go ahead and spring. It is 2 o'clock and we value your time. We are so grateful that you are joining us today. I have to give kudos to Monica because this was her topic of interest and came forward with me. I don't even remember what we were on, but she was like, hey, I think this is really important and we need to talk about this. I was like, that is a great conversation to have. And so she was invited myself and Brianna into this awesome topic of discussion to hopefully provide some clarity and some discussion around it. So I'm going to let you kind of kick off, Monica, and we'll kind of transition.
Yeah, you
Don't forget to hit
can.
record.
Oh,
I already
yes,
did.
that too. Yeah, so welcome everyone. We got some pretty important topics we're going to talk about today. So we hope we find something valuable. Leanne's going to talk about why this matters, and then our agents as role or what our role is on all of this, and then some clear expectations as well. Brianna's kind of going to talk about the financial side of it because she's our financial guru. She's going to talk about the internal financial policies you might want to add to these documents, as well as constructing, updating best practices for our county constitutions and bylaws. And then she's going to touch on just a little bit about that financial toolkit we all have in our office. And then I'm going to talk about how you actually build your county policy and handbook. So we're going to talk about some best practices, tips. I have a checklist too that I'll share. And yeah, so that's kind of what we're going to cover today. Next slide.
And just want to put it out there, there is no silly question. If you have any questions, absolutely put it in the chat, unmute and ask it. Or if you don't feel comfortable, shoot it to me, Brianna, or Monica individually, and we'll make sure it's anonymous. But we're here to hopefully help everybody learn and just provide some clarity around things. So
Yeah. So why are we holding this? One, I thought it was a great idea because we have so many new agents, and we might even have some experienced agents who just need a resource to create a county policy if they don't have one, or they might have one, but they're like, this isn't great. I really want to change it. I want to update it. I want to do things to it, and they just don't know where to start. Um, so again, every county is unique. Some of what we talk about today might not apply to you, or maybe you already have a document and you learn something new. We want to create making these updates to these county documents easier for you while learning to work with your council and your volunteers. And we want to emphasize today, we're not telling you what to do or that you immediately need to implement every single thing we're going to talk about because that's just not realistic. Some things are policy, which have to be followed, but much of what we talk about is going to be structured so you can tailor it to fit to your county because what your county policy and handbook looks like is going to be unique. Um, as we go along today, you're going to learn why having these documents are important, and we'll give you some real world examples of how they've helped us in our county. And again, we just want to be interactive. So put anything in the chat, send us a message, write your questions down. We'll have plenty of time at the end for questions. So I'll turn it over to Leanne.
I love it. Yeah. All right. So I think the first thing that we just want to create a super standard piece for this amazing webinar is the core message is we are trying to make county 4-H easier to lead, not be more bureaucratic. So policy, some of these questions, we always want to think about things that we show up and we're doing really well. And then all of a sudden they show up when a deadline is missed, or there's a disagreement, or leadership changes, or money's involved, or somebody asks, so who actually gets to decide this? And so today is about making sure we have the right things in the right documents, like Monica just said, clarity, reinventing the answer every time something happens. So ultimately, good governance is something we build before we need it. But I'm going to preface this too, because sometimes it is built after too, because we learned a valuable lesson. That's just reality. And so good policy is not more about we got to create the policy, we got to create another one. Let's do this and this. It's about creating clarity. So I just want to kind of set us on the stage of that's the idea that we're trying to move forward. And so where does it belong? So I kind of built this out because sometimes it's like, man, 4-H is so overwhelming. It has all these things. Where do I begin? And so before we write something, it's basically about asking, where does it actually belong? And is it a statewide requirement? Is it how the council governs itself? Is it a local decision or an expectation? Or is it simply information about how we do something? That's something unique, like Monica said, every county is a little bit different. So not everything needs to become policy. So I kind of put this into 4 buckets. You've got statewide policy where every county must follow. Obviously, there's some recommendations in there too, but for the most part, it's a must follow. Then you have your bylaws and government on how the organization governs itself. And that's going to, again, vary from county to county. There are some requirements in there, like our lovely tax and financial compliance. That is non-negotiable. And then we have county policy. So local rules, expectations. Maybe you require clubs to meet a certain amount of times in order to show at your county fair or your achievement day. So those are local decisions and frameworks that you absolutely have the autonomy to master. And then you have your handbooks and procedures. What I really value, I'm giving kudos to Monica and Brianna because they do a really good job of creating handbooks and procedures for their county policies or their premium fares. And that's how things actually work. And so the right information in the right place creates clarity, consistency, and it's something people see. So the optics, it's something we can always go back to and rely on. And different documents have different jobs. And when each one does its job well, people know what governs the decision, what's expected of them, who has the authority, and where to find the answer. And so those are some of the clear pieces as we move forward. Think about, and again, if you have any questions, absolutely let us know. When we think about a shared framework or a framework, state policy is that framework. When we think about North Dakota 4-H policy establishes that statewide consistency of that what we're doing, counties absolutely do need to follow that in terms of their local decision making. But local policy cannot contradict or undo state policy. And for the most part, I think everybody's really good at that. And so the question isn't, do we want to follow state policy? That question is, within this statewide framework, what decision is ours to make locally? And remember, statewide policy isn't untouchable. I do want to clarify that because if something isn't working or you believe it needs to change, we always have policy change process. That's in the very beginning of the policy and it's due annually by March 31st. So don't think that the statewide policy is untouchable. I have established a committee exactly for that to go and review things because we're not perfect. We will never be perfect. And so I don't expect you guys to be perfect either. So one of the examples I have here is like statewide establishes that 4-Hers must enroll in 4-H online. That is an expected statewide policy, non-negotiable. Locally, you might want to determine different deadlines because some counties have deadlines for enrollment. They have deadlines for county fairs. Maybe you have a record book, maybe you don't. Maybe you've got 4-H engagement expectations. So those are, again, things that you can do locally. And local flexibility lives within that shared network of the statewide framework, if that makes sense. All right. Policy protects relationships. I think this is valuable and not something that we always consider at top priority because policy protects relationships as much as it protects the organization. Clear policy helps take personalities, emotions out of difficult decisions. It shouldn't matter which family is asking, which volunteer is involved, or which agent happens to be sitting in the office. Instead of saying, well, Leanne said, Monica said, our agent won't let us, we're here and able to say, here's what policy we agreed to follow, and here is why it exists. That protects families, it protects volunteers, it protects our councils, our clubs, our staff. And when we find ourselves wanting to make an exception because of who is asking, that's usually a good reason to stop go back to policy and understand why we built that policy in the first place. It builds consistency, it builds clarity, and it builds trust. All right. Clear roles create strong local leadership. I love this because I think, and I hear this vary between counties. And so I think this is a great opportunity to kind of have discussion, and would love to hear either at the end of today or if you want to email me personally. A 4-H council is an incredibly important part of our local 4-H program. We want councils to actively lead, providing representation, making appropriate local decisions, stewarding resources according to the 4-H name and emblem policy, helping to shape our amazing local programs. We want 4-H clubs, forming committees, helping to steward experiential learning and those opportunities that you as agents get to create and have these amazing youth development programs. We want them to help support local decisions and goals, fundraising, supporting planning and implementation of the county fair or achievement days. But partnership does not mean identical authority. The NDSU extension remains responsible for administration and the integrity of the 4-H program. That means the extension agent has that responsibility that cannot simply be voted away when an NDSU or like a 4-H council wants to vote on something, if that makes sense. So NDSU extension, 4-H policy, youth protection, financial compliance, civil rights, those are requirements that we have to operate, we have to have. So yes, there are many times when the agent has to say, hey, we can't do that, even if the council has voted differently. 10 yes votes don't make something allowable if it isn't allowable in the first place. That's what I think I'm trying to get out there. But that doesn't mean that the agent controls everything either. Councils need meaningful authority and meaningful work within their roles. Sometimes those roles need to be clarified more. And this is the opportunity to do that. And this also isn't about who has more power. It's an understanding where authority sits, where responsibility sits, and where we work together. So shared leadership works when responsibility is clear, if that makes sense. All right. This one is one that I imagine can be of contention at sometimes. And I want to be especially clear about the other side of the relationship. The extension agent should not be the 4-H council. If the agent has to make every decision, do all the fundraising, attend every meeting, manage every dollar, organize every event, and do all the education, we haven't built leadership. We've built dependency. Healthy 4-H councils help to own that work within their local community. Volunteers lead different committees to help support the agent. Youth have meaningful responsibilities to hopefully try to retain those older youth, as some of you have amazing 4-H ambassador pieces that are moving up into our statewide program. We love that. And it also helps to free more time at what you guys are hired to do: positive youth development and quality programming. So basically trying to indicate here that strong programs shouldn't depend on one person. It's building that entire community to make sure we have a system of succession. All right. What does healthy governance look like? And Brianna and Monica are going to touch on this a little bit too. So when we pull this all together, what does healthy local governance look like? People know their roles. Oftentimes, I know Rochelle was always a proponent of saying, what is the position description for the volunteer? Decisions aren't personality driven. Volunteers own meaningful responsibilities. Committees have a purpose. Youth actually lead. Finances are transparent, and we are intentionally developing who comes next. But I also want to be realistic about what this looks like in practice. So if you're new, or if you've inherited a 4-H council that maybe isn't as easy to work with quite yet, or maybe you don't have like Monica said, any sort of really good governance or bylaws, I'm not suggesting you walk into that next meeting and change everything like Monica said. help you walk through this. Start by asking questions. What does your policy say? What does your bylaws say? Who currently owns that responsibility? Is that written anywhere? Where even is your bylaws and governance? And one of my favorite questions, what happens if the person leaves tomorrow? Because that's what leadership helps to build. Those questions will start you showing you where those gaps are at. It's something we intentionally build over time. And our amazing volunteers, this is what I would say to them. Supporting your agent doesn't mean waiting for your agent to ask you to do something or do everything. Strong volunteer leadership means identifying that you have an appropriate opportunity to own something. You're on a committee, whatever. You bring others alongside you to do the thing. You leave that responsibility stronger for the next person to carry forward. Again, that's sustainability. And I think as we transition into the next slide, again, this doesn't happen accidentally. It doesn't happen overnight. It requires structure behind the program, governing documents, financial controls, and continuity. And that's where I think Brianna gets to take over.
Yes, thank you, Leanne. So what I'm going to be talking about, as Monica and Leanne both have kind of alluded to, is I'm going to be talking on the financial controls. I'm going to hit on the governing documents. We're not going to dive super deep into them to kind of help you build it. And then just those systems to kind of have something in place for when we do have changes. We know we have changes within our extension, but definitely our officers and our volunteers as well. So while policies are really important, sometimes that policy is not enough. Those governing documents are going to help establish not quite yet. Yeah, thank you. They're going to just help establish, as Leanne said, clarity, but that authority, those procedures on just a good explanation of how things get done, and records, which is going to help that next person really understand what's going to happen before they arrived, and they can kind of get a history a little bit of it. So those strong programs should not depend on just that one person who can remember absolutely everything that's always been done because they've been there for a long time. I think we can all think of someone within our organizations who is this individual. It should not depend on our treasurer being able to answer every single question, or our really good longtime leaders that have been there that can remember the history of the fair and what we own, and that extension agent knowing every single password or having that history as well. So the organization itself should be able to kind of look at and answer some of those basic questions. And instead, I just want to help you guys recognize as we go through this, maybe some areas that just to look at if they need to be addressed, go ahead and address them, but decide which documents should contain that information, where those resources are going to be available to kind of help you review that county's current one. And then the next slide, yeah, we're going to talk about a little bit of a fictional county. Some of it might be familiar. We might have heard about some of these examples. Go ahead, Leanne. So welcome to Clover County. I think it was pretty easy to kind of make a scenario based, but I'm just going to kind of walk you guys through something. So Clover County's bylaws were last updated in 2009, and some of the positions listed in the bylaws, they might not exist anymore. And it might also talk about the way that the council operates doesn't match what's going on today versus what's inside the document. The treasurer is the one who they're going to receive the money. They handle all of the check writing. They have all the records, and they also reconcile the account. Now, this individual, this treasurer, is very trustworthy. They're a very capable volunteer, but the entire financial system is going to depend on that one person. Our treasurer and volunteer uses a personal Venmo account to collect registration fees because it's just more convenient for them. And that money may reach the correct destination, but the organization itself doesn't control the account, have access to it, can review any transaction history, or even how the transfer process is handled. The council owns equipment, but no one has a complete proper inventory. People remember that the council purchased tables, they have some livestock equipment, and even event supplies, but no one also knows exactly who owns them, where they're at, what their current condition is, or even who currently has them. So there are some questions about meeting requirements, term limits for officers, what that grievance and appeals process looks like, what happens if a family misses deadlines, and what happens to the money and property if a club dissolves. And then finally, no one is completely certain of, and we're all pretty familiar with this now, which EIN each club is using or whether every club is operating under the correct financial structure. But now imagine, so we have all of this scenario going on, but now imagine that long-term treasurer has announced that she is leaving next month and is no longer going to be handling the position. So right away, I would like you guys to either put it in the chat or go ahead and unmic. What would be some things you'd want to resolve before that transition takes place? Anyone have any thoughts?
That's a lot.
It is a lot.
I think the first would definitely be the Venmo and that nobody can check it, but kind of every single step needs to be gone through.
Okay. All right. I got in the chat, we got passwords on the accounts, that personal Venmo. I will say the Venmo and Cash Apps kind of came up when we started doing the tax things because it is something everybody uses. And I will say, I know when we talked with Leanne and I talked about it, we never thought about it of having some kind of procedural guidelines for it. But everyone is definitely most likely using it. Banking information, passwords. Yeah, I mean that's quite a bit to kind of think about and look at. You guys hit some of the really important ones right away. Yeah, checks and balance files, property inventory. Yeah, really great, everybody. Definitely the number one thing is that those financials, that bank account information, passwords, records, just kind of having all of that kind of laid out. And then going to start looking at those bylaws. Now, none of these concerns automatically mean anyone is doing anything wrong at all. If you start looking at this stuff, definitely let your volunteers know it's not because someone's irresponsible or they're dishonest at all. But most of these situations develop gradually, or maybe it's going to be a sudden thing. But this volunteer especially is handling quite a bit of responsibility for the 4-H organization. While it's working, it's great. This is what happens if that one individual who is relied upon does decide to step down because they just are looking for a change. Now, no one stops to usually ever think or document kind of this process. And I've started becoming one who thinks of the what ifs of something like this happening and just having something ready in case. So the biggest risk is that organization's knowledge, authority, and access just it's concentrated on one person. So when that individual leaves, we need to know kind of where everything's at. The council itself might not know. Maybe there's new officers that have been transitioning out, and that treasurer was our one consistency. So we need to know what they all have, what they control, especially the records. Where are those stored? We know that individual has access to the money. So now what? How do we need to get things now transitioned to the next one? But then the financial system, how is that supposed to operate? How has it been operating? Does it work with how it is? So these are cases to think about where maybe, and I'm going to say it's an internal financial policy becomes valuable. It's going to move the expectations and knowledge out of just that one person's head. And I'm saying head because we know it's not always written down. That person might have a really great memory and just remember their procedures and into some kind of system that then now belongs to that organization. It's also very beneficial because once again, we have clarity. We're going to have clear guidelines to those financial responsibilities and what needs to be maybe further discussed within the council. Next slide, please, Leanne. So an internal financial policy is going to explain how an organization is going to authorize, receive, spend, record, safeguard, and then report its financial resources. So the very first one is authority. This policy is going to identify who approves the annual budget, who has authorization for spending, who's on the accounts, who is able to go ahead and sign for checks, contracts, anything related to that, and then who has authority to open and close the account. While we know this, we have our treasurer officers. They shouldn't be the only individual on these accounts. Just in case of a what if, like the what if worst case scenario would be you have only the treasurer on that account and they were in a horrific accident and now you do not have access to the 4-H account because they were the only ones on there. And that is a really, really extreme what if, but it is something to think about. Those policies, that authority should also address what happens when an expense was included, an expense happened, but it was not on the approved budget, and maybe it wasn't approved by the council. Was it something that should have gone through the council? Was there a spending limit that maybe an officer has that's approved by the council? And then what kind of decisions related to finances should definitely be documented in meeting minutes. So those are some things to really think about and discuss as a council. The next one is going to be documentation. So every payment should have some kind of supporting documentation. It should not just be a check that's been written. There should be some kind of follow-up paperwork. Paper trail is really important. As we've been doing all this tax stuff, we have found how much paperwork is really required for a lot of this, especially when it comes to finances. There should be some kind of an invoice or a receipt, something about like if you're reimbursing a council, there should be some kind of documentation that is showing the business and the purpose of that expense. And the policy should also, and this is kind of my viewpoint, and I know not everyone operates this, prohibit blank or just pre-signed checks. Signing a blank check is removing that really important opportunity to have some kind of verification. I'm one that gets pretty nervous when there's just blank checks laying around because anyone, especially a blank check that's been signed, someone can just fill it out and use it. It's it's a very high risk situation there. So that policy can really address this. Third area is looking at separation and review. So one person should not have the single authorization to be able to purchase, make payments, record transactions, reconcile the account, and then have independent review of all of the same activities. So if you're asking that treasurer who's doing all of the financial responsibilities to then reconcile and look at it, we're just kind of opening up possibility of more risk. I know in our smaller organizations, this might not be realistic to assign every single one of these tasks to a different person, but it doesn't mean we can't have some kind of internal controls. You can always designate another officer or just a reviewer to kind of examine bank statements, supporting documents, reconciliation, and financial reports. We're all humans. Someone can make an error. And just by doing that monthly reconciliation and reviewing the bank statements by a third party who's not related to the person who's doing most of the transaction, it just helps to have extra eyes on it to kind of point out if something doesn't seem quite right or if there was an error. Your policy should also start addressing and looking at accounts and payment platforms used. So those Cash App ones, something definitely written in policy. I know that's something really new because I know we didn't when we were doing tax stuff, did not think about it, but it's an important part and it is a place where 4-H finances are now being utilized because it is pretty convenient to be able to accept payments online. We know a lot of our councils have CDs and savings accounts, and just being aware of all of this stuff is going to be really important. And having organizational money not be collected through volunteers' personal accounts, that opens that volunteer up to quite a bit of risk, but also opens the organization to quite a bit of risk. Our 4-H organizations need to be the one in control of that account, be able to look at that transaction history. And as you guys all know, Cash Apps are linked usually directly straight to the checking account of that organization. So there needs to be a lot of good checks and balances in place for that. And then finally, the policy should explain some kind of transition process. When we have our treasurer leaving or another officer leaving, who is then receiving those records, passwords? How are we switching out information within our accounts? Who verifies that the former officers have been removed from bank accounts and online platforms, and how quickly does this happen? And remember, we're doing this not because we don't trust that volunteer anymore, but just kind of having things to protect that volunteer, but also protect the organization as things are going to be moving forward. Next, we're going to be kind of talking about where information belongs. So not every organization is going to expect the exact same documentation, but kind of understanding where does it go. I'm going to put the link in here because I'll refer to this here. But our number one folder, our Constitution. I know there's a lot of information when we talk governance documentation, and these can kind of be put together into one single one, but your Constitution establishes your organization's foundation. You're going to really, that's going to tell your what the organization's identity and purpose is. It's going to talk about your membership and just the overall structure of the organization, and then what happens if that organization dissolves. The link I put refers you guys to that tax folder that is in the Google Drive. And we have the one folder that has kind of templates for you guys to look at to go to start this or to maybe review and see if there's any pieces missing. Next, your bylaws. This is where we're going to get a little bit more into the details of things. We're going to be talking about how the organization is governing itself. So here you're going to find out your officers, those really good descriptions and terms, talking about your meeting and what those voting requirements is of like what does that quorum look like for your organization. Financial authority, what does that look like? Who's on the accounts? How are things kind of being handled? This does not need to be, that part doesn't need to be super detailed, but having it listed out is really useful. Vacancies, committees, and leadership transitions. Having all of that, that's going to be kind of listed out in those bylaws to kind of help know how to run that organization. And then this is especially helpful if you have a new volunteer who maybe is interested in stepping into an officer role and they kind of want to know what all of those responsibilities look like so they can go ahead and read the bylaws and get a better understanding of that. And Leanne talked quite a bit about the policies, how they establish expectations, boundaries, and internal controls. And yes, absolutely, we start with the 4-H, the North Dakota 4-H policy. And normally, my county, our policies would be a little bit more restrictive or have just the better, clear guidelines and deadlines of what our county does. But our first and foremost, if it's not in our county policy, we follow 4-H policy, and it's usually a little bit more detailed. But as Leanne said, definitely you don't contradict what is in that North Dakota 4-H policy. And the financial policy is something my county just started because we were talking about how do we handle situations with financial things without always having to go back to the council for approval and having just kind of some of those steps laid out. The one question that came up is what do we do with checks that have not been deposited in over a year? We don't have any guidelines or procedures on how to handle that. So that's where our internal financial policy started getting written, just so we have something to refer to without always having to go back to that executive board for permission on every kind of smaller detail when it comes to the management. Next, your procedure guidelines. This is just explaining how things are completed. These are those specific steps. Since I'm talking the financials, this is where you're going to have those details out of the counting cash, handling deposits, handling your cash apps, transferring new officers. All of that's going to be listed detailed there. A lot of the procedures and policies tend to fall into, I know Monica will talk about it, your county level handbooks on how things are handled and why. This is really especially helpful for new families or officers that they can go to and review this. Any questions about kind of those 4 documents? And these can be combined. Just be aware that if you were to kind of maybe say something that's in policy, then that's going to be in procedures that they do match that we'll want to review. And like Leanne said, we're not trying to create more paperwork. It's just having a good place of information to provide that clarity so it's easier to operate our organization. Oh, okay, I got a question.
I kind of answered it, but I might make sure that we say it for the recording, but I'm gonna wait till the
Okay.
end because we're running quick on time, so.
Okay. Next slide. So these are just some things to make sure your documentation is matching your program. If you went and you found your original documents, like Leanne said, like, can you find your original document and it hasn't been updated since the 90s? It's definitely not matching what your organization is doing today. So try to find that information. You're first going to gather it all up. I'd really recommend having a committee that's going to review these documents versus doing it at a council meeting because it'll make the council meeting go very long. And then you bring those proposed changes to the council for approval. But having someone else kind of dig into it and update it is going to be really much easier than doing it at one council meeting. So gather all that information, compare it to what used to happen and what's going on now that it's reflecting what your organization is, make all of those revisions, and then the adoption is going to happen. It'll go through, should be going through your council or club minutes. It's going to be documented there that we looked at the constitution, governance, paperwork, policies. It's been looked at, and then the next meeting should be approved, and just make sure it's accessible to everyone to review it. So if there's any questions or maybe even things that were missed, they can be brought up for attention. And then definitely revisit that in a timely manner. There might be some things like the procedural stuff can be looked at and policies can be looked at annually, but at least your governance, your constitution, your bylaws should be reviewed. I'd say my rule of thumb is about every 5 years, just to make sure those are matching with what your organization is doing. Really quick, you guys are all very familiar. You got your 4-H financial toolkit. There's a lot of information in there for guidance and things like that. The new thing I'm just going to briefly touch on because it's in an email with the training is the statewide annual financial statement that just went out. That's one that's been updated to try to match what our statewide financials look like now. Especially with all the tax information that went out, our financials are trying to the financial activity should match that of each level of our organization. So we know our councils have a lot of responsibility and information to it. Our clubs that do have accounts have some information, but they're just not as big as our councils. And then we do have some of our 4-H clubs that they don't have a checking account and financial activity. They handle things on a much smaller basis. So that's information is all there. We are updating it whenever people point out something because we are human too and aren't perfect. And there's always what ifs that are popping up. And there will be an email of what all of those edits are. But just go ahead and look on that online because that's where those edits will be. All right, I'll hand it off to Monica.
Okay, we're gonna pivot to actually creating this stuff. If you're new or you don't have a policy, you probably have no idea where to start. Don't worry. I made a really long checklist. I sat one day and just typed a lot. I'm gonna share the links here in the chat. Oh, maybe that one did not work. Hopefully that one works. Let me redo that one. Do they both work? One looks like it kind of did a thing. So the checklist is located in the State 4-H Google Drive, in staff resources, and then in county shareable documents, and then it's in the policy folder. That county shareable documents folder is to be used by all agents and support staff to share your resources that you already have with other agents. Like you can see some counties have put their stuff in there, but also to get ideas for creating or updating new documents or documents already have. So there's stuff for premium sales, independent members, handbooks, enrollment ideas, all kinds of stuff in there. Next slide. So before we get too far into the weeds of building the policy, we want to reiterate this, and Leanne talked about it, but your county council can't override something above it. So the purpose of our county documents is to govern local and unique situations in our county, not to create new 4-H protocol policy that contradicts either IRS requirements, Secretary of State requirements, NDSU extension policy, or our state 4-H policy. So next slide. Um, so while you're looking at the checklist, you guys can look through it while I'm talking. By no means is this checklist comprehensive. I tried to get everything, so that's why it's like, I don't even know, 12 pages long. I don't even remember how many pages it is. But it's just meant to be an easy to use checklist. So as you're maybe auditing what you have currently or trying to build something new, you can just look at the checklist and be like, yep, got that, got that. Oh, I need that. Oh, I should probably add that. And again, each county is unique. So some of these aren't even going to apply to you, or you're going to have stuff that I didn't even think about because I've never heard of it. Your county policy document is your rule book of 4-H in your county. Having a strong policy in place is going to save you so many headaches. I promise you. We'll talk about that later. Some county policies are really in depth. Some just have broad statements, which is why I have this slide. Some of these generic statements that refers families to the state policy or the state fair book for information, so you don't have like a 30-page policy because that's really long. Some policies are 2 pages, some are 20. My county policy, 7 pages. And I think that's way too long, but I can't even, there's nothing that I can cut out because everything is important. The length and depth of your policy is really going to depend on the size of 4-H in your county. If you have a really tiny 4-H program, it's probably not going to be as long as maybe Cass County, where they have 20 some clubs and hundreds of members. It's also going to depend on issues you've had in the past. If you have a really good program, great volunteers, your council's so easy to work with, it might only be 4 pages. If your council's not so easy to work with, or there's been some issues with past family members or some crazy situations, it might be longer. So that first statement that I have on this slide is actually in my policy, and it's at the top in red because I added it new last year. But I basically just say, hey, if it's not in here, we follow state 4-H policy. Or if it relates to exhibits or projects, we follow what is in the state fair guide. If there's a conflict or something, we're going to look at all those documents and we'll come to a decision is basically all that it says. Next slide. Okay, so Brianna alluded to this, but having an annual review is super, super important. I've heard from some counties that their, policy or bylaws or whatever was, last updated in 2001. Well, that's probably not accurate anymore. Your protocol for an annual review should be written somewhere. That way everyone knows when it's updated and families, volunteers, leaders can be prepared and come to that meeting or that committee with suggestions for updates. And then you don't forget to update it. If you have a protocol in place for updating it, you don't forget to update it for 3 years and then you're like, oh, we probably should have done that. Additionally, I want to add that every important document needs somebody responsible for knowing where the official copy is, when it was last approved, when it needs to be reviewed. And oftentimes that's the agent because we usually keep the original copies, on our computers in a folder or a file in somewhere in our office because a lot of that is records retention and needs to be housed with us. The checklist on this slide is on page 1 of that bigger document. I find it really helpful to emphasize changes that were made in my county policy to families so everyone's aware of the new stuff. So no one can say, well, I didn't know that. I didn't see that. If it's in red, we know it's new. So that's one way to do it. Some people bold it, underline it, italicize it, highlight it, whatever, change font, whatever you want to do. But that's just kind of a best practice thing. The other thing I like to do is share it a variety of ways. Again, so no one can say, well, I didn't see that. I didn't know that existed. Whatever excuse they want to give it to you. Um, I share uh, mine, I print it in neon colored paper and they get it in the mail after they have enrolled for the new year. Again, they can't say they didn't get it or didn't know what they looked like because they got it. I promise you. Okay, next slide. So, I'm not going to go through the whole checklist. We don't have time for that. Also, you'd probably fall asleep. I don't know. But just some important things to include is membership policies, dress code, club related specific policies if you have some things for, dual dues, enrollment, stuff like that. Volunteers, 4-H council stuff. You don't have to go in depth with your 4-H council in a county policy, but it should talk about it a little bit. The in-depth stuff should be in your council bylaws and constitutions and stuff like that. Stuff on your county fair or achievement days, project and exhibit specific policies, animal projects, awards and recognition if you have that stuff, leadership opportunities if you offer that, judging in competitive teams, financial policies, some like behavior or risk management stuff as well. A grievance policy, it's important. We'll talk about some of that stuff later. And then any unique county specific policies or just events that you might have. Okay, next slide. So this is my troubleshooting slide. When I train new leaders, I tell them that behind every policy is somebody's name. Not really. I don't put their names behind it, but a policy doesn't get made for no reason. We don't just like make up stuff. There's a reason. Um, and I tell them that, and they probably know. We're also human, which means someone will always try to find a way around your policies. We're not looking for perfect. We're thinking ahead and trying to combat issues. So every year brings new challenges to your program. So like we've already went over, having an annual review process in place ensures that you can make timely updates and that either new policies get added or you get rid of outdated information. Because as technology changes, or just different reports are required, we might have to update some of that. Be specific. You want to spell it out. Do not assume everyone knows what you mean. You will also have new families who probably have maybe never heard of 4-H before they randomly signed up on September 3rd. So be specific, include all the little details. That's also gonna prevent people from trying to read around. Because if you spell it out and it's specific, you can't read around the policy. My third one is, and this is my most important, if I can't tell you how many times a year I say, sorry, it's in the policy, or in the policy it states, I say that a lot, especially around fair time. My policy saves my butt a lot. But by having a strong policy in place and enforcing it, it stops a lot of those complaints or grievances that you might get and get lengthy and drawn out. It stops them right there because it's already there. It's spelled out for him. When I enforce it, I'm no longer the bad person. The policy is. If it's in the policy and I say, hey, sorry, our policy states this, I'm not telling them no. The policy is telling them no. Because I live here, and a lot of you guys also live where you work, and your kids might also be in 4-H. So strong policy doesn't get you in trouble. But even the strongest policy is no good unless you can enforce it. And you have to enforce it equally. You can't say yes to one family and no to another. And that can be really hard to learn, and sometimes it's uncomfortable, even for me. Um, for an example, my county policy states that our yearbooks are due on the second Friday in August in the extension office by 5 p.m. And when I say 5 p.m., I do mean 5 p.m. You can't text me at 6 o'clock that night and tell me you forgot. Not allowed. And our consequences that if they're not in by then, they lose their ribbon money and you can't participate in the premium sale next year. And all of that is written in our policy and it's been like that for years. So if you establish a deadline or a requirement or expectation, you and your families need to know what happens when it's not met and it needs to be enforced. So the next one, just as important, oh, sorry. If you have a rule, you have to have policy to back it up. You can't just like make things up, but then like you have nothing to back it up. I learned this the hard way this year on one of my policies. So our animals, we have a policy that says animals are not released until after the premium sale. Okay, cool. But what if somebody leaves? I have no grounds to stand on if somebody leaves early, which is exactly what happened this year. My livestock committee came up to me and told me that a family was pulling out early. They were loading up the trailer, animals were gone. And they wanted me to do something about it. And I said, I can't. Because I have a policy that says they can't leave, but what happens if they leave? So just kind of look at some of that. And some of that you might just have to learn the hard way. And that's just the reality of it. Along the same lines, you don't want to create policy in the middle of a conflict, which is hard because you want to. When an unexpected situation exposes a gap, you want to deal with that situation with what you currently have. So you can only deal with it what you currently have written. You can't make up policy in the middle of your fair and then say, hey, actually, we're doing this now, because that's not fair to the individual or the 4-H'er and then everybody else who maybe it doesn't apply to. Just write down stuff throughout the year and then review it at your annual review. You can't enforce anything until it's officially voted on and approved by your council and your county as a whole. Have deadlines. Deadlines are important. You also need to stick to them. Deadlines are an important life skill for everybody. I right. I tell families that a lot, and the parents are usually really good. They're like, "Hey, they knew it was due by 5 p.m. I told them." And that's just their problem. The parents have told me that. They're like, they knew. And that's just something they will learn and they have to find out. I always like to keep them consistent too, just to avoid confusion. So, try to keep everything the same every year. So maybe your stuff's due on, the first of the month, or for us, for whatever reason, it's always due the second Friday of a month. I don't know. That's just what we picked. But just try and keep them consistent, have deadlines for everything, because then you're not doubting when stuff is due or when it needs to be turned in. You want your policy to be clear on expectations of your county, but you don't want it so extensive and strict that it's no longer fun for your 4-H'ers or it limits participation. 4-H is open to all youth, and youth come from a lot of different backgrounds and life circumstances. So having options to participate or even policy for extenuating circumstances is a good idea. I heard somebody, I don't know who told me this one time, but they have a once in a lifetime free pass. So if a family misses a deadline, they get like a one-time lifetime free pass that they can then, and register or whatever, but then that's it. They don't get a late pass anymore. When dealing with animals, really important to have some language in there for what happens if they die, what happens if they're mean, what happens if they get sent home in the middle of the fair, because that happens a lot. And just know, no policy is perfect. You're going to run into issues, and that's why we improve and update them. So next slide. I added this just for some real life situations. So I had 3 times this year where I had to use my policy during the fair, but I couldn't fit all 3 on the slide, so we're just going to go with it. These are real. They happened this year at my fair. So the first problem was I had a parent text me like an hour before the premium sale asking why their kid wasn't listed in the premium sale program. And I always panic when I get those because I'm like, oh God, I have a typo. I forgot a kid. No, I go in fair entry and I'm like, hey, you didn't register them for the premium sale. Sorry. And they were really good about it. They're like, hey, I forgot. I guess next year. But I have policy to back me up. Our policy states everyone must pre-register by the second Friday in June to be eligible to show at the fair. You also have to designate your premium sale item. Can't change it or add it after our deadline. The second problem was, and this was the first time I've ever had a problem with statics. Usually it's animals or premium sale, so this was a new one for me. But I had policy to back me up. I had a 4-H'er, a older 4-H'er who was quite upset that they got a red ribbon on their food project. And they came up to me and asked to have it reviewed by the static committee. I said, absolutely, I'll gather them and they will bring their decision to you here in a little bit. So I gathered them, I told them the circumstance, I gave them the state fair book and the appropriate foods guide that we have to use, and they collaborated, and the chair of that committee went and talked to that 4-H'er and told them their decision, and I didn't have to do anything. They did it. So that's a great example of using your volunteers, but I also had policy just to say that I can have a committee make that decision. So, okay, next. Okay, so just some similarities and differences between a handbook and policy. So they're both important county documents. The intended audience is internal, so it's meant for your extension staff, your volunteers, your leaders, your 4-H family, and they contain a lot of the same information, but they're worded differently. So the policy is like non-negotiable boundaries. It's law, if you want to call it. The handbook is more like just logistics. The policy uses like a lot stricter, like if you want to call it lawyer language, I guess. Handbooks is just, it's accessible, family-friendly language that everyone can understand, and it's used for quick reference. The policy is a lot more narrower, talks about, very specific circumstances. The handbook is broad. It covers everything and anything. So schedules, point systems, instructions, literally everything you could put in a handbook. So policy is governance, handbook, guidance. Next slide. This is just the list for what to include in a handbook, and that is on pages 12 of 19 of that checklist document that I shared. Your county handbook is just your family's instructional manual. Can be as simple or as in-depth as you need. Some counties have a handbook that covers just the whole 4-H year, and some have a separate handbook that's meant just for the fair that has like show orders, patterns, weigh-in times, registration instructions, things like that. The one major thing that handbooks contain that policies don't is kind of like an overview of 4-H, what 4-H is, the 4-H basics, how it operates, pledge, colors, emblems, stuff like that. Another nice thing to add is additional resources or links to like 4-H or Google Drives or your county website, stuff like that. And that can just be added at the end or sprinkled in throughout. Okay, next page. So some tips and tricks for your handbook is the handbooks are maybe easier to create than a policy, but they can be really lengthy and time consuming just because they're a lot larger. And oftentimes the agent is going to compile that handbook and then they're going to bring it to their 4-H council for, review, input, and approval. Or you might have a separate committee make that handbook with your help. So some tips and tricks is creating a year at a glance calendar that you could put at the beginning. So you just put like registration deadlines, project cutoffs, fair week, stuff like that. Also making like a consistent template and layout so it's easy to read and find stuff. Table of contents, that's a good one. And then you want to summarize like complex rules like the animal ID requirements or deadlines or like the 4-H versus fair entry. You can use like nice tables or graphics. I'm a visual person, so that just makes a lot more sense in my head, but it also prevents you then from having to type really long, lengthy paragraphs that maybe no one will read. Accessibility, a lot of people don't have printers at home anymore, and you're probably just sharing it digitally. So having clickable links, but then also having it be able to be a printed document. So you might want to have links and QR codes. Um, so for me, I only send the handbook to new families, not because they're the ones who are really going to use that, and then everybody else just gets it digitally and they can get a copy if they want. Um, you can also add like a whole section just for first year families that just kind of talks about just things we take for granted or goes over the million acronyms that we use in extension because they probably don't know what we're talking about. And then like I said before, don't assume that they know what you're talking about. Include all those little details that they want to know. And then I find that having somebody who isn't familiar with 4-H read and review my stuff to make sure it makes sense, I find that really helpful. So that's all I have.
All right, trying to find my mute button here. All right, love this. Just kudos to my team here. And for recording purposes, I will read out the questions. But to leave you on the last slide, again, we just want to reiterate that don't leave here thinking you have to go home and rewrite everything. That is not our intention. Our goal, I think, for you, if you maybe don't have a policy yet, you don't really know where your bylaws are located, maybe you're starting from scratch, is pick one thing to clarify, one thing to review, and maybe one thing to build. Start there. Because ultimately, that's what the entire conversation is about, is clear roles, clear expectations, which helps with shared leadership. Read out that awesome question that was asked. So thankful for the question. And that ultimately helps build those stronger relationships and stronger 4-H programs. So good policy doesn't create more bureaucracy. It creates clarity and consistency that helps and allows you guys to lead well, your 4-H programs to lead well, and all the good things. So with that, I know we're kind of right across time. What questions maybe we have? I don't have anything after this, so I will stay on as long as I need to answer any questions. We sure appreciate you guys being on here today. And if for some reason you don't feel comfortable sharing a question, email any one of us. We would be happy to connect with you individually as well. So I loved the first question. I'm going to read it out. Interrupt me if you come up with a question. I'm going to read it out for recording purposes. For clear expectations, who should take ownership of or have some form of that documentation for a transaction? Does this expectation only on that 4-H treasurer or is it on the extension office? And so I would place the primary responsibility with that 4-H club council treasurer who's conducting the transaction. They're going to know most likely what it's for. They're going to have the receipt and everything. Then the USU extension agent provides that oversight and the accountability. And I would not expect that poor agent to independently do all of those things, to create and maintain documentation for every transaction, because that unintentionally shifts that ownership of the 4-H organization finances from the elective volunteer role, that leadership role, to the agent. And we're trying to make sure that our volunteers lead with shared leadership. So I would expect every financial piece to have enough documentation that if I haven't seen it as a person of maybe coming in for an audit, I would be able to understand later what happened, why it happened, and where that money went. That's a perfect example of why that would be really important.
Also, hey, Leanne, can I add one thing?
Mm-hmm.
As the agent, just also let that officer know what the NDSU, the record retention is, so they hang on to those files for years to come. So like after maybe 3 years, they don't do a purge of that information because they just have a lot of files.
Sure. Yeah. this might be a good question for Brianna or anybody else on here that might be able to help Melissa. So what system do 4-H councils use for inventory management of items purchased with the council funds? I imagine Excel is used quite readily, but maybe everybody else has something else they might weigh in that works well for you.
I know ours is, it's going to be in QuickBooks because we have that documentation of the purchase history.
QuickBooks is not always free though. Am I correct on that?
Yes, correct. That's just the system ours is using because we have found a way as nonprofits we can get it for a much, much cheaper price per year.
So there is a nonprofit discount to purchase QuickBooks. I do know several other counties do have QuickBooks, so you could also reach out to Ransom County. They also use QuickBooks, but Excel is easy as well. Really good question.
Hi, Leanne. This is Megan. Can you hear me?
Of course. Hi, Megan. What you got?
I might be in the not so great because I'm one that follows the transactions in the office. And when I started in the second county with Extension in Steel, we had a treasurer, and this is also kind of when the whole like starting to get the 1023s in order. She just dumped everything in the office and was like, I'm done. And so I kind of approached trying to find a new treasurer with like treading lightly. So, I mean, it's okay though that I'm doing more than other counties, but in what I do appreciate is like when I have any questions or all this other financial stuff to get done, that I have more insight being in charge of that transaction. So just, I guess, is it okay that I'm doing that?
Yes, Megan, you have a very interesting situation. So yes, and I'm so grateful that you are exceptional at reaching out with questions to me and Brianna. And so you've done a very good job of in the interim of trying to find that leadership role to fill as a treasurer. It's actually helped you learn more about the situation because if you're anything like me, I'm a learn by doer and I have to do it to learn it. And so I think it might help for succession planning for you, Megan, as you get to teach in a new volunteer treasurer. You'll have a better understanding of it too, to come alongside them and help them be successful.
All right, thank you.
Really good question. So I really liked the next question that came through, and who should build the 4-H County policy? And then is that led or built by the extension agent, or is that shared with the council? And I love that question because I've seen in different states it go very wrong. And in my opinion, I see the county policy as a collaborative process between the extension agent or agents. If there's 2 agents in a county, I do expect both of them to be entwined in that discussion and in the county or 4-H council clubs, because then you have so much expertise and really good perspectives from everybody as you kind of set that framework. And obviously, you don't need to start from scratch. I know Brianna and Monica have. You already have one too, and you want us to look at it? Awesome, send it our way. We'd be happy to look it over. But really, the agent helps provide those guardrails. County leadership helps to build within them. Now, one caveat, which was a question paired on this, is, what if it's more like I should have like along the lines of financial expectations. And so I love that little caveat because unfortunately, we, in my position at the state level, we don't get to make those rules. That is above us. So that's the IRS and the Secretary of State. And so some rules we have no jurisdiction over and they have to be followed. And that's like the financial situation. So financial compliance is not one of those state frameworks that's non-negotiable that really you don't get to have a ton of county policy written on, unfortunately. You might have other things, and I have some examples in the guidance of like differences between like if you set a county budget and you have the opportunity to set a budget line item, what is the amount of money that your county is going to decide that before we take it to vote? So maybe under anything under $500, you can go ahead and just buy. Maybe we don't need to have a county vote of that. But if it's over $500, maybe we need to make sure that's voted on, it's in the minutes, and it's been approved. So there is some ability to have some conversations at the county levels as you're thinking about budgets, budget creations, budget goals, fundraising, things like that, as it relates to program quality and program movement forward. But when it comes to good old IRS and Secretary of State, state framework, non-negotiable.
A little addition to that with the collaboration that Leanne said, at least for the policy building, the agents are also the ones who get the questions that might not be in policy. So like Monica said, she'll make notes throughout the year of things that need to get brought up, maybe back with that policy committee to look over and decide kind of how to handle that as maybe some situations come up that just wasn't thought of, because it's really hard to think of all of the what ifs, and then writing it down is just not a feasible thing.
What other questions you guys have? Trust me, I know it's not easy, especially if you're building from scratch. So we're here to help and support you. Do not think you have to do this alone. All right, I'm not hearing anything. Feel free to reach out. I hope you guys have an amazing rest of your Thursday, and thank you so much for joining us. Recording.